That night, those words finally made sense to me in a way they never had before. Every beautiful object in that house required maintenance, cleaning, security, insurance, property taxes. Each room needed heating, cooling, repairs. The pool, the landscaping, the driveways, all of it demanded attention and resources. But more than the time and money, I realized there was a deeper cost I hadn't recognized. Each possession carried a small but real psychological weight. Each item represented a decision I once made, a responsibility I had taken on, a small claim on my mental bandwidth. I sat down at my kitchen table, a beautiful custom piece that had taken months to create, and started making a list of what actually brought value to my life. What I genuinely needed versus what I had accumulated because I thought I should have it, or because it seemed impressive. The list of necessities was surprisingly short. That weekend, I didn't go into the office. Instead, I went through every room in the house, really looking at each item and asking myself, if I didn't already own this, would I buy it again today? Does this add more value to my life than the freedom I would have without it? The answer, for the vast majority of things, was no. I realized I had fallen into a trap that many people do when they achieve some financial success. I had been collecting possessions not because they improved my life in any meaningful way, but because they matched some image of success I had absorbed without questioning. The more I thought about it, the more I recognized that what I really valued wasn't any of these things. What I valued was freedom, the freedom to focus entirely on work that fascinates me, the freedom to spend quality time with my children without distractions, the freedom to move quickly, think clearly, and make decisions based on what matters most to me rather than what I've already invested in. And every possession that didn't directly support those priorities wasn't just neutral, it was actively working against them. That's when I made the decision. I would sell nearly everything, starting with the houses. I would reduce my life to the essentials. Not because I couldn't afford these things, but because I couldn't afford what they were costing me in focus, freedom, and clarity. When I announced this publicly, the reactions were fascinating. Some people thought it was a sign I was having a breakdown. Others assumed it was some elaborate tax strategy. Few seemed to understand that it was actually the most rational decision I could make based on what I truly valued. The process of selling was surprisingly emotional. Each house represented memories. Each object told a story. There were moments of doubt, especially when letting go of things that had once seemed so important to acquire. But with each sale, each empty room, each simplified space, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. It was as if I could suddenly breathe more deeply. I kept only what directly supported what mattered most to me: my work and my children. Everything else, I let go. Now I live in a small house that I rent. I own very few things. When I need something, I can buy it. When I'm done with it, I can let it go without attachment. The change in my mental clarity has been remarkable. Without the constant low-level drain of maintaining and managing possessions, my mind feels sharper, more focused on what truly matters to me. This doesn't mean everyone should sell everything they own. That's not the point. The point is to question the unconscious assumptions we make about what we need to be happy or successful. For too many of us, possessions start as things we want, transform into things we think we need, and end up as burdens we don't know how to live without. We become curators of our own museums, maintaining collections that no longer serve any purpose except habit. What I've learned is that true freedom isn't about having everything you want. It's about being unburdened by things you don't need. I remember a particular moment that really crystallized this for me. About a month after selling my main house, I needed to retrieve some documents from storage. As I was looking through the boxes, I found an expensive watch I had completely forgotten owning. It had been sitting in that box for over 2 years. I sat there holding this watch that had cost more than what many people make in a year, that I had once been so excited to acquire, and realized I hadn't even remembered its existence. It hadn't added any value to my life for years. Instead, it had just been one more thing to track, insure, and worry about losing. That watch became a symbol to me of how easily we confuse acquiring with experiencing, having with enjoying. I ended up giving it away to someone who would actually wear and appreciate it daily, and that decision brought me more satisfaction than owning it ever had. I'm not saying material things can't bring joy or have value. Of course they can. A comfortable bed, tools that help you work effectively, items with genuine sentimental meaning, these things can enhance life. But for every possession that truly adds value, most of us have dozens that don't. And we rarely stop to question the cumulative weight of maintaining all those things, not just financially, but mentally and emotionally. Since simplifying my life, I've noticed I make decisions differently. I'm less likely to solve problems by throwing money or resources at them. I'm more creative, more willing to find solutions that don't involve acquiring something new. I sleep better, I'm more present with my children when I'm with them, I can change course more quickly when needed. Most surprisingly, I enjoy the few things I do own much more deeply. When you have less, you notice and appreciate what remains. This journey has also made me think differently about time. We often don't recognize how much time we spend managing, maintaining, organizing, cleaning, and worrying about our possessions. When I eliminated most of mine, I suddenly had hours each week that I hadn't even realized I was losing. It's made me wonder how many people live in a kind of time poverty, not because they don't have enough hours in the day, but because they filled those hours with the maintenance of things that don't truly matter to them. What's particularly interesting is how this decision has affected my work. Many people assumed that selling my houses was a sign I was less committed to my companies, that perhaps I was planning an exit. The reality was exactly the opposite. By simplifying my personal life, I created more mental and emotional space for the work that truly matters to me. I found I had more energy, more clarity, and more focus for the challenges of building companies and developing technologies that could meaningfully impact humanity's future. I've come to believe that for many people, especially those in creative or demanding fields, simplicity isn't just a personal lifestyle choice, it can be a professional advantage. When your life is cluttered with possessions demanding attention, some part of your mind is always occupied with their management, even if you're not consciously aware of it. I now see my previous attachment to multiple large homes and numerous possessions as a kind of unconscious compensation. Perhaps for working too much, perhaps for not spending enough time with family, perhaps for some deeper insecurity about status or accomplishment. Whatever the psychological roots, the possessions weren't solving the underlying issues. They were just masking them. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes from eliminating distractions and simplifying your environment. Ideas flow more easily, priorities become sharper, decisions become clearer. I'm not advocating for extreme minimalism or suggesting that owning nothing is somehow morally superior. I'm talking about thoughtful reduction, about consciously choosing what deserves space in your life rather than accumulating by default. For me, the process revealed something unexpected. How many of my purchasing decisions had been made almost unconsciously, based on assumptions about what someone in my position should have, rather than what actually enhanced my life. Take art, for example. I had collected numerous expensive pieces that I thought I should appreciate. Some of them I did genuinely enjoy, but many I had selected because they seemed like the kind of art someone like me should own, not because they moved me or brought me daily joy. When I started asking myself the hard questions about each piece, does this actually enhance my experience of this space? Would I choose it again today? I found that much of what I owned was serving a purpose other than my own genuine enjoyment. The same was true of houses. Did I need multiple large properties? Was I using them in ways that justified their enormous cost, not just financially, but in terms of management and mental overhead? The honest answer was no. This experience has made me think deeply about the nature of wealth and what it means to live well. Traditional definitions of wealth focus on accumulation, having more money, more properties, more possessions than others. But there's another kind of wealth that comes from needing less, from being unburdened by excess, from having the freedom to focus your resources, both financial and attentional, on what truly matters to you. I now think of wealth not in terms of what I can afford to acquire, but in terms of what I can afford to live without. This shift in perspective has practical implications beyond just personal possessions. It's changed how I think about the companies I build, the projects I take on, and the way I allocate resources. At Tesla and SpaceX, we've implemented versions of this principle, ruthlessly eliminating unnecessary processes, questioning default assumptions about what's needed, focusing resources intensely on what actually advances our core mission rather than spreading them across everything we could potentially do. The result has been companies that can move more quickly, adapt more readily, and focus more intensely than if we tried to do everything that seemed like a good idea. By eliminating the unnecessary, we've created space for what's essential. I think many people, especially as they grow older, intuitively understand what I'm talking about. There's a reason why people often speak of downsizing in their later years not as a loss but as a liberation. They've lived long enough to recognize what actually matters, what actually brings satisfaction, and they're ready to let go of the rest. But we don't have to wait until we're older to make these discoveries. We can start asking these questions at any point. What am I maintaining that isn't enhancing my life? What am I holding on to out of habit rather than genuine value? What would happen if I let this go? The answers might surprise you, as they surprised me. I'm not saying everyone should sell their home or give away their belongings. That was the right decision for me based on my specific circumstances and values. But I do believe everyone could benefit from asking themselves a simple question. If I didn't already own this, would I buy it again today? For the things where the answer is no, consider letting them go, not to deprive yourself, but to free yourself. In a culture that constantly tells us we need more space, more stuff, more options, choosing less can feel radical, but it might be the most liberating choice you ever make. I've noticed something interesting since sharing this perspective publicly. People often assume that I'm suggesting everyone should live with bare necessities, almost like a monk. But that's not what I'm advocating at all. What I'm suggesting is consciousness and intentionality about what we allow into our lives. For some people, certain possessions, whether it's books, tools, art, or other objects, genuinely enhance their existence and bring daily value. There's nothing wrong with having things that truly serve you. The problem arises when we accumulate without questioning, when we hold on to things out of habit or perceived obligation rather than genuine utility or joy. I still own things. I have clothes I enjoy wearing, books I value reading, and tools that help me work effectively. The difference is that now everything I own has earned its place in my life through conscious choice rather than default accumulation. What I've discovered is that possessions often promise freedom, the freedom to enjoy luxury, to have options, to display success. But too often, they end up restricting freedom instead, limiting our ability to change, to move, to focus on what truly matters to us. I chose to sell almost everything because I valued freedom more than possessions. The freedom to pursue the work that fascinates me, the freedom to be fully present with the people I love, the freedom to change course without the weight of what I've already accumulated. And that freedom has been worth far more than anything I sold to gain it. I think about my grandparents often during this journey. They lived through challenging times when resources were scarce, and they developed a relationship with possessions very different from what's common today. They kept what was useful, repaired what was broken, and passed on what was no longer needed. They didn't accumulate for status or out of habit. Each thing in their home had a purpose, a story, a reason for being there. Nothing was disposable. Nothing was thoughtlessly acquired. There was a wisdom in their approach that our culture of abundance and easy acquisition has largely forgotten. A recognition that our relationship with physical things matters, that what we choose to surround ourselves with shapes our experience, our attention, and ultimately our lives. When I look back at the enormous houses I once owned, filled with beautiful things that demanded attention but added little value to my daily life, I don't feel loss. I feel as though I've awakened from a kind of trance, a spell that had me believing I needed all those things to be happy or successful. The truth was exactly the opposite. What I needed was to be unburdened by them. There's a particular memory that stands out to me from this process. I was selling a house that had a beautiful view, one I had once believed I couldn't live without. As I stood there on the terrace one last time, looking out at that view, I realized something important. The joy of that view didn't come from owning it. It came from experiencing it. And I could experience beautiful views anywhere without the burden of owning and maintaining a multi-million-dollar property to access them. That realization that experience and ownership are separate things, has been liberating in countless ways. I've found I can enjoy beautiful spaces, objects, and environments without needing to possess them. I can appreciate without acquiring. There's a clarity that comes with simplicity. When you strip away what's unnecessary, what remains stands out more clearly. Your priorities become sharper, your choices become more intentional. That clarity has been the greatest gift of this decision, greater than any possession I ever owned. I often think about what I would tell my younger self about possessions and success if I could go back in time. I would tell him that true wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by what owns you. That freedom comes not from having everything you want, but from needing very little. I would tell him that the most valuable things in life, creative work that matters, deep relationships, time to think and explore, are all enhanced by simplicity and hindered by unnecessary complexity. And I would tell him that no object, no matter how beautiful or expensive or impressive, is worth the mental freedom that comes from being unburdened by excess. This journey of simplification has made me question other defaults I once accepted without thinking. If I was wrong about needing multiple houses and countless possessions, what else might I be wrong about? What other unconscious assumptions might be limiting my thinking, my happiness, or my effectiveness? That questioning has led to other changes in how I structure my time, in how I approach relationships, in how I make decisions about what projects to take on. In each area, I've found that consciously examining defaults, rather than automatically accepting them, leads to choices that better align with what I truly value. The philosopher Diogenes once said, "It is not that I own little, but that you want a lot." There's profound wisdom in those words. So much of what we think we need is actually manufactured want, created by comparison, marketing, or unconscious assumptions about what success should look like. When we step back and honestly assess what actually enhances our lives, what makes us healthier, more effective, more present, more alive, the list is often much shorter than what we've been led to believe. For me, that list includes meaningful work, time with my children, good health, mental clarity, close relationships, continuous learning, and the freedom to pursue ideas that might help humanity. Almost everything else turned out to be optional. I'm still learning and evolving in this journey. I haven't achieved some perfect state of minimalism, nor do I think that's the goal. The goal is alignment, having what surrounds you reflect what truly matters to you, not what others think should matter. Some days I still find myself tempted by some new thing that promises to improve life in some marginal way. The difference now is that I recognize the pattern and can ask myself the harder questions before acquiring, will this actually enhance what matters most to me? Or will it just be one more thing to maintain, manage, and eventually discard? The most surprising outcome of this journey has been how it's affected my happiness. I didn't sell my possessions because I thought it would make me happier. I did it because I wanted the freedom and focus their absence would create. But increased happiness has been an unexpected side effect. There's a lightness that comes from owning less, from needing less, from being less tethered to physical things. A sense of possibility. Tall guy, wearing a hoodie, acting suspicious. That was it. No name, no face, no real details. Just a flimsy description, broad enough to fit half the people walking down the street that night, and apparently that was all it took to set off a full search. So there I was, standing in line, scrolling on my phone, half asleep from exhaustion, when suddenly I felt a firm tap on my shoulder. I turned around, expecting to see a fan asking for a photo, but instead I found myself staring at two very serious police officers. One of them immediately said, "Sir, we need you to step outside." At first, I honestly thought it was a prank. Maybe one of my friends had set this up. Maybe someone was filming for social media. I even chuckled and asked what this was about, but they didn't laugh. Their faces stayed cold and professional, and that's when it hit me this was real. "Sir," the taller officer repeated, "you match the description of a suspect we're looking for. We need to ask you a few questions." And here's the strange thing. Even if you know you haven't done anything wrong, your mind still races with worst-case scenarios. What if they don't believe me? What if this turns into something bigger? What if people snap photos and by morning the headlines explode with wild speculation. 5 minutes later, I was outside, hands cuffed behind my back, while half the taco place pressed against the windows to watch. To them, it must have looked like I'd just been caught red-handed pulling off some kind of late-night crime. In reality, I was just hungry, and now humiliated. If you've ever had that moment where you try to explain something obvious about yourself and no one believes you, multiply that frustration by 1,000, that's where I was. After the officers pulled me into their car, they told me not to worry, that it was probably just a misunderstanding. But the second the door slammed shut, reality changed. I wasn't Elon Musk anymore, I was a suspect. And suspects don't get the benefit of the doubt, no matter what their net worth is. The drive felt both endless and absurd. I tried joking with the officers, saying, "Hey, listen, I'd really like to finish those tacos I was about to order. Can we just clear this up quickly?" No response. I mentioned SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink. Still nothing. One officer glanced at me in the rearview mirror and said flatly, "Sir, impersonating a public figure won't help your case." That's when it dawned on me. They genuinely thought I was faking being me. Now picture this. You've spent decades working on rockets, cars, satellites, brain-computer interfaces. You've been on every major news outlet, every documentary, and yet in that cramped back seat, none of it mattered. To them, I was just a tall guy in a hoodie with a story. When we got to the station, things only got worse. The first officer walked me through the door and announced, "We've got the suspect." Heads turned, and suddenly all eyes were on me. One young officer looked at me, squinted, and whispered to his partner, "Isn't that?" But before he could finish, his partner shook his head. "No way. Musk doesn't walk around here in hoodies buying tacos." I wanted to laugh, but my wrists ached from the cuffs, and the situation was spiraling. They sat me down in a small room, the kind you see in TV shows, with a buzzing fluorescent light and a table that had seen too many sleepless nights. The officer across from me pulled out a clipboard and started with the basics. Name? Elon Musk. He sighed, already annoyed. "Sir, let's try this again. Your real name." I stared at him. "That is my real name." Another officer joined in, smirking like he'd caught me in a lie. "All right, buddy. If you're really Elon Musk, what's the launch window for the next Falcon 9 mission?" I smiled. "October 7th, 8:36 p.m. Eastern, weather permitting. Payload is a batch of Starlink satellites." They exchanged looks. One of them scribbled something on the clipboard. The other muttered, "He did his research." At this point, my frustration turned into something else: amusement. Here I was, the supposed mastermind of a crime, now accused of being too good at impersonating myself. Hours dragged on. They asked me to empty my pockets. My phone, my wallet, even the receipts from Tesla's cafeteria. "Fake IDs," one officer muttered as he examined my driver's license. This is a pretty elaborate setup. I leaned back and laughed, maybe a little too hard. Do you really think someone would go through all this trouble creating Tesla receipts, faking a California license, memorizing rocket launch times, just to stand in line for tacos? Silence. Then, one officer said, "Stranger things have happened." The more I insisted, the deeper the hole seemed to get. At one point, they even Googled me on a computer right in front of me. My photos popped up, dozens of them. Me on stage, me at rocket launches, me shaking hands with world leaders. The officer leaned in, then looked back at me, then back at the screen. He frowned. "Okay, he looks like you. But how do we know these aren't doctored?" That was the moment I realized no amount of facts, no achievements, no fame could override the human brain once it's locked into doubt. Then came the final straw. Someone higher up entered the room, maybe a captain or lieutenant, I don't know. He stared at me for a long moment, then asked, "All right, if you're really Elon Musk, prove it. Call someone important." So I did. With my one allowed phone call, I dialed a number I knew would end this circus. "Hey," I said when the line connected, "it's Elon. Can you please explain to these officers that I am who I say I am?" The room went silent. Every officer leaned in, waiting. And then, through the speakerphone, came a tired but unmistakable voice. "Elon, what did you get yourself into this time?" It was my lawyer. The officers exchanged panicked looks. One even whispered, "Oh my God, it is him." Suddenly, the energy in the room shifted. Chairs squeaked, papers shuffled, apologies mumbled. The cuffs came off, replaced by awkward smiles and nervous laughter. But even as I rubbed my sore wrists, I couldn't shake one thought: how fragile identity really is. Strip away context, remove the headlines, the suits, the stage lights, and you're just another person trying to explain yourself to someone who doesn't want to believe. And the strangest part? For a brief moment, I almost felt free. Like without the label, without the weight of being Elon Musk, I was just a guy in a hoodie again. But that feeling didn't last. By the time they escorted me out, I knew the headlines were coming, and I couldn't help but wonder what version of this absurd night the world would choose to believe. The cuffs were gone, but the silence in that small room was heavier than iron. I rubbed my wrists, still red from the steel, and looked at the officers as they shuffled uncomfortably in their seats. One of them finally cleared his throat and spoke, his voice almost apologetic but still stiff with protocol. "Mr. Musk, it appears there's been a mix-up." I raised an eyebrow. A mix-up? Another officer slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside was a grainy, black-and-white photo, clearly taken from a security camera. I leaned in, and for a moment, even I froze. The man in the picture, broad shoulders, same height, same messy hair, looked shockingly like me. Same hoodie style, same awkward posture. For a second, it felt like looking into a distorted mirror. "This individual," the officer explained, tapping the photo, "is wanted in connection with a series of thefts. Our database flagged him as being in the area tonight. And according to multiple witnesses, he was last seen heading toward the very taco stand you walked into." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you're telling me you mistook me for this guy because he eats tacos in the same neighborhood?" The officer winced. "With all due respect, sir, the resemblance is uncanny. Combine that with the location, the timing, and, well, we thought we had our man." I leaned back, shaking my head. It was absurd. Elon Musk, CEO of multiple companies, builder of rockets, confused for a petty thief just because he looked like him and was in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Do you know how many billions of dollars in technology I oversee?" I asked, half smiling, half exasperated. "Do you think I'd risk all of that for a couple of stolen wallets and a taco?" One younger officer actually chuckled under his breath before catching himself. Another shot him a look as if to say, "Shut up before you make this worse." That's when the captain entered the room, the same stern man who earlier demanded I prove myself. Only now, his voice had softened. "Mr. Musk," he began carefully, "we owe you a formal apology. We had reason to believe the suspect would appear in this district tonight. When you matched the description almost perfectly, and the timing aligned, well, let's just say our system flagged you as a high-confidence match." I crossed my arms. "High confidence? Your system thinks the richest man in the world is moonlighting as a local criminal?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he sighed. "Our system isn't perfect. At the end of the day, it still depends on humans interpreting the data. And sometimes, humans get it wrong." For a moment, I didn't know whether to be angry or amused. But then I realized this wasn't just about me. This could have happened to anyone. Someone without lawyers on speed dial. Someone without the name recognition to eventually get the benefit of the doubt. "Do you understand," I said quietly, "that if I wasn't me, if I didn't have the ability to call in proof, you would have locked me up tonight? And tomorrow the world would read about a thief instead of the truth?" The captain nodded, his expression heavy. "Yes, sir, and we take full responsibility. We are very sorry." They went further. One officer actually brought me coffee, his hands shaking slightly as he placed it on the table. Another muttered, "Big fan, by the way," as if that could erase the hours of humiliation. But apologies, I've learned, don't undo an experience. They don't erase the memory of being handcuffed, of being doubted, of being reduced to a suspect, just because the world decided you looked like the wrong person. As they escorted me out of the station, I glanced back at that grainy photo still lying on the table. That other me, the doppelganger, the stranger whose face had nearly cost me my freedom for the night. And it made me wonder, how many times in life do we get mistaken for someone else? Not literally, but figuratively. How often do people project onto us their own assumptions, their own stories, their own fears until they're convinced they know who we are? We live in a world that thrives on quick judgments, on data that claims to know the truth but often misses the human beneath it. Tonight, I wasn't Elon Musk the innovator. I wasn't a CEO or a father or a dreamer of Mars. I was just a resemblance, a convenient fit for a story that wasn't mine. And maybe that's the real lesson here. We can't always control how the world sees us, but we can control how we respond when it does. I walked out into the cool night air, free again, but not unchanged. The tacos were long gone, the hunger forgotten. What lingered was something deeper. The realization of just how fragile identity is and how quickly it can be stolen, twisted, or confused. The officers had their apology. The headlines, I knew, would have their story. But only I carried the weight of what it really felt like, sitting in that room, staring at a face that wasn't mine, and yet, somehow, was. It's been several days since that night, and the memory still lingers in my mind like a strange dream. I keep asking myself, did they ever catch the real man they were looking for? The one who apparently looked just like me, who was supposed to be in that exact place at that exact time? I still don't have the answer. Maybe he's behind bars now. Maybe he's still out there, walking the streets unnoticed. And maybe I'll never know. But what I do know is this. I chose not to file a complaint. I didn't call my lawyers, didn't demand someone be punished for what happened. I could have people in my position often do. But I didn't. Because at some point during those long hours of replaying everything in my head, I realized something. Everyone makes mistakes, even those in uniform, even those whose job is to protect us, to act with precision and authority. And the truth is, their mistake could have ended badly. It could have escalated into something much worse, but it didn't. I walked away with only shaken nerves and a strange story to tell. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about pride, or about being Elon Musk, or about having the power to make it right. This was about understanding the humanity behind the badge. Those officers weren't robots, they weren't flawless guardians. They were people, just like you, just like me. We live in a world that's quick to judge, quick to condemn, quick to demand perfection from others, especially from those who serve. But perfection doesn't exist. Not in the police, not in business, not in life. Mistakes will happen. The real test isn't whether we fall short, but whether we can admit it, whether we can forgive it, and whether we can grow stronger because of it. So I didn't take revenge. I didn't go public to shame them. Instead, I took a step back and tried to see it from their perspective. Imagine being them for a second, standing there, believing you've cornered a dangerous criminal, acting on incomplete data, adrenaline rushing through your veins, and then realizing you got it wrong. That takes courage to admit too. If there's one thing I've learned in business, in science, in life itself, it's this. Humility is not weakness. Humility is strength. It's the reminder that no matter how far we've come, no matter what we've built, we are all human, we are all fallible. And maybe that night was the universe's way of reminding me of that fact. Because when the lights go out, when the titles fade away, when there's no company logo, no headlines, no billions, we are left with just ourselves. People who stumble, who learn, who sometimes get it wrong,